Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Go-to-Market Lab, a podcast where founders learn the art of scaling and the science of scaling their go-to-market strategy through different pivots and stages of the SaaS software business growth journey. So welcome back. I appreciate all of you guys joining today. Today, we're going to address a challenge that founders typically have at the early stages before they're able to amass at least their first round of customers, which is really, how do we get started? It's hard to sell something when you don't actually have client 1, 2, or 3, or 4, at least to drive some case studies. So a typical way that founders go about this process, at least in the tech world, is to get what's called, we'll dub it for this call as it has different names depending upon what your marketing likes to label it as, but we'll call it a design partner. And what that typically is, the premise is that you've picked an organization. At the beginning, there's not an exchange of money. So you've got a company that says, hey, you know what? I have this problem that it sounds like you can solve. I'm willing to invest my team's time to give you product feedback, to give you direction. I'm willing to invest my time to get the outcome I want, which is I want my problem solved. And, typically what you want as the founder of that company at some point for there to be an investment in the company, as well as turn that client into one of your biggest and first champions or cheerleaders to advocate for the product. So this kind of little bit of a chicken and egg problem, because what also customers can find if you are able to convince a customer to walk down this path with you, what they'll find is you'll get an introduction from someone who is a friendly. So maybe the venture capitalist will call one of their buddies and say, hey, Sarah, can you talk to this company I'm investing in? And she's going to take the call. She might even say yes, because it is something that's important, but maybe not super important. The team will work with them, but at some point, it becomes blatantly obvious to the vendor that this is a stack rank top problem. Why is that? Because the product's not being implemented, it's not being used, and therefore the whole experiment kind of like it gets at a standstill, and there's no outcome candidly for the client or for the vendor itself. So this is kind of the topic we're going to double click on. And so for today, I'm really excited to bring someone who I couldn't have found somebody better fit for this topic. So Mr. John Sapp, I have this joke that, he's friends with Julian Waits, who's on my episode 1. So I'll have to make sure I don't say the same thing I said to Julian, but John Sapp, he knows everybody in the space. But what I love about John is that he really is very involved with technology, and he's always been an early adopter. He's known amongst the vendor space as being someone who, if you have the opportunity to lock him in a room and have him on a whiteboard and say, hey, this is what I need, he will absolutely help you create a product. And a lot of times his vision is something you're going to find that other CISOs need. So he's a great representative. He's also the creator of Cybersecurity Conversations, The Hype, Hope, and Harsh Reality. I love the 3 H's. He's also a visionary as it relates to his background. So I'm going to pause and let him kind of jump in and tell you about how he came to this place, because I think it's a great story into how he got to the place where he is today. And then we'll double click into the episode. So for the listeners on the call, this is what we're going to cover in the episode after John gives you a little bit of background on him. Is we're going to talk about how you actually find the right fit for a successful design partner. How are you going to quantify and really squeeze all the juice out of the lemon, I like to say, and really turn that early design partner into an early adopter and cheerleader, so that you can actually flip that into a multitude of customers as an outcome and as a result. So that's really kind of the premise of this conversation that we're going to have today. So without further ado, John, thank you so much for joining me on today's call. I'm really excited, especially to have another Texan and on the call too as well. So a little partial there. So sorry, Californians on the line. It plays my heart for you as well. But maybe just give us a little bit of background into how you really came up in the world of cybersecurity, which again, I've you and I've talked about this. It's just a lovely story.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have. And me and Julian go way back, and I blame him for where I'm at today. But it really started with as a child, I was really curious about things, so I always got in trouble for taking things apart, and that translated into being sent to a vocational technical school where I learned to write software in high school. I decided to skip college because I figured I knew it all, but I quickly learned that it was always going to be a learning experience. And so I got to a point in my career after, 15 years of doing development, and realized I needed to pivot. And that's when I pivoted into the whole concept of security risk and compliance. And while at a large pharmaceutical healthcare company, went through about 9 roles in 10 years, but it was progressive growth around just constantly being curious and thinking about things differently, and always not being satisfied with the status quo or the way things were always done. I was always looking for a better way to do it, to work smarter, not harder, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to me, one of the things that, we hope as vendors in this space and our listeners, our founder listeners always hope is it's not just the person with the title at the sexy company. Great if you can get, somebody from executive from Walmart on the line, but you want to have the mindset you have, which is you're a tinkerer. You want to look at what's new. You want to see how things work and also understand how, how the technology really can evolve. And I think that's what has really made you relevant. It's making CISOs relevant who are really gravitating to, being able to adapt their strategies. So again, I can't wait for the conversation. So let's jump into it today. Just jump into the conversation. So you and I were talking about the story and something near and dear to my heart and my background in governance, risk compliance around risk quantification. But maybe just share with us that story as an example of how you have worked with vendors in the past in really evolving being forward thinking about what your needs are, and how has that kind of relationship happened. And I'd love that risk quant story or another one that you could share, and then we'll double click.
So it was Julian who was the general manager for Pivot Point Risk Analytics, who built Cyvar, the cyber value at risk product. And he was the one who called me up and said, "Hey, I need you to kick the tires on this, give me the good, the bad, and the ugly." And that's really where it all started. So it's funny that, he was your first guest, and now I'm here.
Oh, all roads go back. Now, poor Julian's gonna listen to this. Or actually, not poor. He's gonna love this. He loves when all roads go back to Julian. So
Yes.
we'll move on from the Julian show. But go on.
The whole idea was that he always, no matter what company he went to, as you know, Julian's a serial entrepreneur. And he would go to these companies, he would call me up and say, "Hey, this goes back to his days at Bravion. I need you to tell me what you think about this product. What's good about it, what's bad about it, what's it missing, all those types of things." That really kind of sparked the opportunity for me to apply my curiosity and always wanting to find a better way to do things, not necessarily create something brand new, but evolve something. So innovation in that sense. And that's really what kind of led to this whole concept of being a design partner. And it was thinking about things from my role and responsibility, and how can I apply this, but then what's missing? What's next for it? And it just kind of became that expansion or evolution, if you will, of that any given product. And it was always coming back to, and it's funny that you mentioned, whiteboarding. Yes, if you lock me in a room with a whiteboard, you'll come out with there will be plenty of ideas on the board. And that's kind of the running joke about me, is that how much I love to whiteboard. But that is where, to me, the creativity flows, because you put a pen in someone's hand, and that's where you really start to see the visual come to life, and then somebody putting some code behind it and making it happen.
So what do you think? So if you using that conversation or maybe another conversations that you've had in these early days, what do you think the vendor does in that conversation to really engage you? Because I would say vendors have a sneaky way of like I could get you to walk down a path on this call, John, if I wanted to, right? And I could ask
Right.
questions that really lead you to validate my thesis that's already in my brain. That's not the point, right? The point is to really, hey, John, I'm going to ask a question that's just going to start to spur your curiosity and not actually say, hey, I want to know, do you have this problem and how do you solve this problem, which is very much kind of anchoring you towards a very narrow aisle. So how do you kind of have a story of how a vendor or particular person has engaged you in that session in order to let that creativity flow and to actually start to get those, that innovation conversation going?
Yeah, it I really do. And so I always ask, and this is where I think about things in terms of the hype, the hope, and the harsh reality. So I always want to know, what is their view of the hype? What is it about their product that they think is so fantastic? Because that will tell me what they're really trying to pitch. As much as they may try to disguise it, if you push it, then okay, what is it about this product that nobody else does, or that you do better than anyone else on the planet? What is it about that? Give me that elevator pitch. And then I take that and I dive into it and said, okay, so help me understand what you hope for me to be able to get out of it. And then it comes back, no, okay, well, here's what I hope to get out of it based on what you've just told me and the way I think about it. And then we start to have that very honest and transparent conversation. Because the first thing I want to make sure that a vendor does is let's both check our emotions at the door. We have to take emotion out of this because at the end of the day, we are working together to try to come up with a solution that is relevant no matter what industry an organization is in. It is the common problem because it's not so much the challenge that changes, it's the techniques that change and by the attackers. And then we, as a industry of protectors, have to think about how do we combat that. So it is a game of chess. And so, in order to even be able to compete in this game of chess, we've got to be honest with each other because this is not about a transaction. It's about a relationship, thought leadership, and supporting an entire community.
That's fascinating because what we're really highlighting is that there's a building of a relationship that is happening in tandem with the building of a product in that transaction, so to speak. It's really about relationship and partnership development more than anything else. So along
Absolutely.
that lines, John, could you describe give us an example of a win-win partnership that you and your organization had with a vendor that you felt like really was a win-win, really knocked out of the park as it relates to advancing you and your mission and your objectives and your team's objectives, as well as the vendor, if we had them on the line now, would say, oh, it was fantastic we worked with John because here's what happened as a result as it relates to our growth. I'd love to hear a story around this working out really well.
Yeah,
Both sides.
I actually have a recent story that has happened here since in my 3 years here at Texas Mutual, and it was around the idea of as we look at back in the day we used to have unified threat and vulnerability management, right? And there was always this concept of how do I bring all these things together? And as I started to build out a cyber risk governance program and a process for being able to provide visibility and communicate what is the risk of that we have as it relates to a cyber attack and the potential impact to the organization and being able to communicate that up to the executives, I was trying to look for and understand how to be able to get visibility up to the executive level and the board, down to the operational and technical level, and then across the organization at both IT and business management. And so I got a call in January of 22 from someone that you probably know from the GRC days. And, he called me up and he said, hey, you know what? I want you to take a look at something for me. And so I started looking at it and I started to come together. The idea was that it was being pitched to me as more of an ASPM solution. And I said, well, no, you know what? I get it. ASPM is part of one of the new acronyms that one of the Gartnerisms that's come out. But
Yeah.
that's not really where this plays because ASPM has a whole different set of capabilities that are not this. What I saw was the opportunity to aggregate, correlate, deduplicate, normalize, prioritize, and visualize all of this vulnerability data, whether it was from an application, static or dynamic scan, from the cloud environment, CNAP type capabilities, from an endpoint, from you take your security technology that's doing any kind of detection and you toss it into this funnel and out comes true prioritized set of risks to your environment that I can put in a business risk context. And that turned into the product that now is known as and I guess I can say that here. It's AppSoc. It's a product that was built and really, but it was more about helping the vendor understand where they truly fit and where the value was because of the outcome that was being produced. Yeah, I get from a marketing standpoint, it's nice to fit into the ASPM category because that's where everybody was jumping into. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the right fit because the problem it solved, the outcome and the values that it achieved to me was somewhere else.
And that's a good reminder. I think, for example, iconic brands now like X, formerly known as Twitter, and Lyft and Slack. If you actually go back to their origin story, they started something very different. Twitter started as I believe, a podcasting service. And so to your point, I think that is where it's, founders and listeners on the line, if you are lucky enough to engage with someone like John and their their company and be able to listen to their thought process, I think your customers will actually a lot of times will identify the secret sauce that you didn't think was that amazing, but they're telling you, no, 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 no. I know that does this thing, but this thing over here is really valuable. And I think that's really, to me, what the mindset should be. If you would, if I'm curious if you agree with this in that conversation, which is, hey, John, here's my product. I'm not going to lead with, here's my product, period, full stop. Now, you tell me what parts of this do you actually see value in? Not just value as in that's nice and that's cool and all, but value that you would pay for, John, in a future setting. And really being open-minded and letting the customer, kind of tell you, not you tell the customer as to what, what you believe is the product that you should be, et cetera. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's very fair, and you hit on a very key point there because it's important for these vendors to look at this relationship and understand. Yes, you're going to come in with it thinking of it one way, but when you put this out in front of your customer prospect or someone who is looking at solving that same problem, it becomes, well, to your point, they may have intended it to solve, this problem over here on the left, but it really solves these things in the center and to the right. And they really need to be open to that level of feedback because that is what is ultimately going to deliver it to a broader audience and make it more applicable as far as the overall cybersecurity community goes. And that to me is more important because now it's built off of that relationship, the perspective. And I always suggest that they keep diversity of thought as a key to driving their success.
Yes. One of our previous episodes, Kursat, who is a 4-time CEO founder, he says, it's important to get out of the office, i.e., don't talk to your echo chamber. It's great. Your friends and family, they're all going to yeah, good job. I totally see it. I see the vision. They don't want to hurt your feelings, but you need to talk to people that don't have your background.
Right.
For example, I was just on, just working with a client where the background of the team is very similar. They all have the same competency, et cetera. And it's actually the opposite they're looking for is someone to round out the team that does not have that competency to be able to think of the problem set in a different way. So I agree with that. So here's the $1 million question that actually, funny enough, last night I was talking with a VC who's a board member of one of my clients, and said, hey, we got to find this change agent type of, fill in the blank, this technology leader in order to get our first set of customers. But how do we find that person? Now, separately, I've got a MarTech solution that I'm building on the side with a business partner that, you can scrape a lot of very interesting things off of web pages now. And there's products like Clay out there that do that. But at its nuts and bolts, John, putting the tech aside, like how I might use technology to find someone like you, but how, what a marketer needs to understand is if you're my quote unquote ICP, ideal customer profile, I'm not going to be able to Google, find me thought leader CISOs, or maybe you are, maybe there is. So what we look for as marketers is we look for signals that maybe are substitutes for, so an example I'll give that another podcast I listened to, Topline, gave is, for example, if I'm marketing to selling software to restaurants that are kind of turning into chains or about to franchise, I might use the number of reviews as a substitute for understanding what the revenue is. And so those are the more reviews, et cetera, are growing. So are there any kind of specific criteria? So people like you, John, well, I can see that they typically hang out in these LinkedIn groups. They're in these Slack channels or in this, black, very, very dark channel that nobody's supposed to know about, this WhatsApp group. Typically they do blog posts. How do I find someone like you with your type of personality that wants to tinker, wants to be a thought leader, who's a good leader of people so that, when you bless this project that you can get people to also follow your way? What are the criteria that I could think about creatively as a marketer and how I'm going to kind of put together your persona and find you? That could be a big question.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question, and I don't know that it's one that's necessarily easy to answer. But here's how I think about it: it is you want someone who understands that the journey is never complete. That there's always something that someone can do a little bit better to address the problem, because the problem never goes away. So it's having someone who is curious, someone who is not satisfied with the status quo, someone who often asks questions from sometimes a devil's advocate type uh, position, being able to think
Mm.
about things a little bit differently, approach someone. I'd say, in some of these security groups, communities on LinkedIn and other forums, find those people who are, we do happen to get together in different groups like the CISO Society and those types of organizations where, we participate in things like the Evanta community and things like that. So it's got to be someone who's comfortable with being uncomfortable, at putting themselves out there
Mm-hmm.
and being able to contribute to a conversation without being concerned about their feelings being hurt because someone doesn't agree with them. Because you want someone who doesn't agree with you. And I want that even as a leader. I don't want my team to agree with everything I say. I want them to challenge me in a meaningful way, something that is not
Sure.
just a challenging question for the sake of, hey, I challenged my boss today, but it is, did you challenge them with something that made them stop and think? And that's what you
That's
want
true.
is you want to be able to be challenged to stop and think, okay, I had this idea or I had this thought and this was my
Mm.
strategy, but I can make an adjustment based on some feedback that I just got. So you want
Mm.
someone who is okay with being challenged, but also someone who's willing to challenge.
Mm. So maybe an interview question is, were you a troublemaker when you're young? Just kidding.
Yeah, I
But
like that
I hear.
question though.
But you're right. I think ultimately the get out of the room comment, I think to me, the way I interpret it is that, listen, if you're selling, if you believe that there's a specific, profile, let's say CISO in this case, you got to get out of the building. You got to go to networking events. You got to start to get a sense by talking to human beings about, hey, who do you know in the space that you feel like you follow? Right. That you typically, so maybe, looking at those who have followers, looking at those like yourself who are not afraid to get on a podcast with a vendor or be able to give an op-ed piece on commentary on a recent event like CrowdStrike or what have you. So I think those are kind of that's a good. I think someone who is willing to stick their neck out there, willing to hear dissension and to hear different perspectives, and who's kind of okay, maybe has a history of tinkering. So one of the recommendations I made to one of my to a founder that I'd met at a conference was, you know, what you should really do is ask your sales reps, because in their case they were reseller models. So like, go ask the reseller to connect you with the other vendors, and then ask those other vendors who are doing pretty well who they kind of found in the space who gave them really good feedback, right? Because typically someone like you could be a repeat offender, right? So if you're going to help out this product last year, perhaps you were probably going to do it again because you're going to keep searching for that next thing.
You're spot on, and I am indeed a repeat offender.
Mm.
And I intentionally list those advisory board positions on my LinkedIn profile for a couple of reasons. One, it's part of my own personal brand management, right? But two, it is to let people know that I am there for driving thought leadership, and not just to say that I have X number of advisory board seats, but it is to I'm there because I'm legitimately looking to contribute something, not just to the community, but to also my organization, because that's part of, for me, how I grow in my position within the organization where I am. And
Yeah.
I will tell you, thing that I love is that my CEO, she is an avid supporter of me doing these types of things because she sees it as I'm representing Texas Mutual in a very good way. And so
Yeah.
with that, and that's part of what also helps fuel me in doing this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I know. Well, I know. I have taken a couple occasions over the years where I've called you and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And so, and I know part of it is that you get a lot of those phone calls. So I appreciate you picking up my call. So let's
Absolutely.
kind of pivot in this into another part of this podcast segment into really the stage. So let's frame it for the listeners here that you've got your customer design partner. You've worked with them, you've heard their feedback, and now they're starting to use the product. And so, kind of, you're at the stage where you really need to get them to a point to where they're seeing success. Why is that? Because at that point, you can ink a case study. At that point, they
Right.
might, want to back you up and be able to talk to as a reference to other prospects, et cetera. But John, you've been an early adopter many times in your career. What do you feel like is the top mistake the top critical mistake that startups make with their first customers that results in them not transforming them into early adopters?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I think for me, the number one thing is they think that their solution, there is no competition for their solution, that they are the only ones that do what they do. That is the number one turnoff for anybody who might have been willing to listen to you. Now they don't want to hear it because it says that you're very narrow-minded in terms of your thought process. It says that you're not open to feedback, and it says that at some point you're going to try to force that solution down their throat. And we are as CISOs, we don't want to be in that position because, as much as I love adopting things early, I still have to have use cases and justification internally. I don't get a blank check and a checkbook just to write text for solutions however I want. I still have processes I have to follow. And if a vendor it thinks that they're the only solution, that I should not take the time to even in a RFI kind of an approach, kind of soft compare them to someone else, then that means that it's probably not somebody I want to be involved with. So that to me is the number one mistake, is thinking that they have the silver bullet and that they're the only ones that does have it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think hungry but humble is what a former employer
Yeah.
advised used to say. Like you got to have gravitas when you're selling your solution. You got to have a
Yes.
little bit of swagger, but at
Right.
the same time, you've got to be open to know that. I think one of the things that especially for products that are coming out nowadays, where there aren't a lot of comps, but there are competitors. They're still kind of trying to create categories. I always say, don't just look at your direct competitors are doing the thing. What is the substitute? What is the
Right.
alternative? If you didn't
Yes.
do that thing, those are also your competitors. In some cases, Microsoft Excel could be your competitor, right? Or your
Right.
do nothing could be your competitor. So I agree with you there. So I'd love for you to share. You said something to me as we were prepping for this episode the other day that I thought was really helpful from a framing about how you think about what what companies you're going to partner with in terms of your thought process of what's a priority. And you shared, how do you make the decision of what is worth really your time and money and effort, and kind of ROI. Wanted to see if maybe you could share that with the listeners today.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I think about is looking at what are the current trends with regards to attacks, and what's the potential impact that that particular type of an attack or that particular type of risk could have on an organization. And it is oftentimes taking a look at what are the things that I'm most concerned about. And it's when somebody asks me the question, what keeps me up at night, I always say nothing, because I think I have a pretty good strategy for how we have a layered defensive depth approach. But I do have prioritized things from a risk standpoint. And it's also understanding, those risks in regards to what the impact is to my organization, what that financial impact is, and being able to quantify that risk. And, it's that thought process is what I use to really think about what's next, or where do I want to invest my time and energy, because it's understanding what is the outcome I'm trying to achieve, and at the end of the day, what value can I deliver to my organization that is going to support us in both protecting the environment but also enabling the company to achieve its innovation and strategy goals. Because it's
Mhm.
one of the things that for me is security does not generate revenue. However, it does protect the generation of revenue. And I always keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think for those listeners who are not specifically in the cybersecurity field, I think to me what I hear you saying is really the key word is what's the business impact and what is the value. So in my mind, part of the vetting process, if you were a qualification process for a customer design partner, a little much like what you would do in a sales process to decide if a prospect is worth your time, i.e., if they're going to actually cough up the money, is to really push and ask questions as to say, okay, John, you're interested in this problem. Well, what does this what is the negative impact or negative consequence, or what would happen if you didn't solve this problem? Okay. How would you explain that then, John, to the board? And how would they interpret the impact of that problem? And if your person has clarity on those answers, then now you're also working with somebody who can justify the cost
Right.
to also get the budget to pay for. B, you also know somebody who is also probably going to help you in your go-to-market messaging, try to decide what is it that you need to say. Because I think what a lot of especially new technologies is that you got to find the money for it. And so it's our job. My belief is that it's our job as go-to-marketers and salespeople and market is to actually help the customer create the business case. If you can't
Right.
articulate what the impact is, whether that's a financial impact, a risk, a risk avoidance, risk mitigation, et cetera, whatever your statistic is that whether it's productivity or efficiency, if you can figure out the direct line to tie it to a topic that's being talked to the board, a new product, a new offering, digital transformation, reduction of cost, reduction of expenses, et cetera, that it's going to be really hard to really get that impact. And I think that's one thing that I find is the struggle is if I'm going to do right by your time, John, I'm going to keep asking you the so what and why questions to your answers, because if the more I can get from your voice is what you're going to say internally about the why, like why we should invest in this product, then I got a sense of how somebody's going to justify it. And I think that's one of the biggest, I think that's the resonating thing that I heard that could apply to, any product, any industry.
Yeah, I couldn't have summarized it any better. So well done.
Okay. All right. I'm glad I passed that test. What, and from your perspective though, ROI, like that's really hard to do, especially because you typically have quantification that you can do, right? Because you can see, for example, your number of volts is going down or your remediation time is going down. So there's obviously some data you can drive. But a lot of times, it might be, hey, I saved downstream the organization this amount of time, but you're not going to really put measurement points on where people are, what they're spending their time on and off. And so just curious from your perspective, what have been good ways, just in general, that you have driven or created kind of ROI business cases with vendors and in partnership with vendors to really kind of get to the point to where that ROI discussion is very meaty with good, with good evidence.
Yeah, that's where my statement about security not generating revenue but protecting the generation of revenue is being able to
Okay.
frame it up into that business risk context in such a way that can be consumed, up, down, and across the organization. And what I mean by that is this: is that if I can say, okay, the cost of our current highest risk is let's call it identity related, and it's customer identity is always that's everybody's challenge because there's so much to it, right? But identity being kind of the new perimeter, if you will. And so it is, if we have a compromised identity, then that means there's going to be operational impact. And so the cost of remediation for whatever our identity related problem is, let's call it $1 million. And let's say, so it's $1 million fix, but it's going to protect our operations. So we will prevent operational disruption. And we know from our business impact analysis that that's going to cost us X amount of dollars per day. And so by
Mhm.
being able to compare the cost of the remediation to the cost of loss of operations, loss of productivity, there are a number of cascading risks that come as a result of a cyber attack or even a technology outage, right? There's operational risk. So disruption means that there's impact to your customers. And the longer you're out, well, now there becomes financial risk because you're going to start to lose money. Then there becomes brand and reputational damage because now you start to lose customers potentially because, in some industries, like in the pharmaceutical distribution in pharmaceuticals, they have to ship complete to hospitals. If they can't, then you move on to your secondary supplier and you don't go back to that primary until something happens with the secondary. So now there's brand and reputational
Mhm.
damage, there's strategic
Yeah.
risks, regulatory compliance risks, that it goes on and on. So a cybersecurity or technology incident can have those cascading risk effects. So by putting numbers to those things, and these are numbers that are provided to you based on the organization, the impact analysis, simply put, now I can put a number on that and say, okay, you want to spend $1 million to save the potential loss of 100 million? It's an easy question to answer. So it's all about
Yeah, exactly.
positioning the business to make a well-informed risk-based decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well said. What I know, John, you sit on several customer advisory boards and have currently and have had others in the past. Maybe give your top, couple of tips, if you will. So if the listeners could could be a fly on the wall into the room whenever, you're representing kind of the customer, if you will, typically on those boards,
Right.
or the target customer, of what advice you would give as it relates to go-to-market execution in those kind of, Series A, Series B stages. So let's couch this at this stage where there's a round of customers, there's kind of a base, but what you're really trying to do is scale and grow. Just any kind of advice that you might have, if from a sitting in the boardroom, of what vendors should be thinking about given today's day and age, which unfortunately, people like you are getting, cold emails out the wazoo because AI automation is speeding that up. And just, is there, kind of any recent, direction you would give to the audience
Yeah,
from a customer's
yeah,
perspective?
the number one thing is be careful about what categories you want to jump into, or what categories you say you fit into, because what we all think about as those potential target customers and prospects of these organizations is, we look at, and all of a sudden, we we look at, the AI security posture management. Everything's a security posture management today, right? And you see
Right.
these companies that were purpose built for one thing automatically pivot and say, oh, well, we are now category XXSPM, and here's why. But then when you start to question them about, well, what makes you fit in that, they can't really tell you. So before you say that you are, and you spend any time or money or effort into trying to convince Gartner or others that you fit into a particular category, make sure you have some very specific facts that you can put evidence and demonstrate behind that as to why you fit into that category. Because it's one thing to get Gartner or Forrester or anybody to say you fit into a category, but when you get in front of a customer, if you aren't in the first 5 minutes of that conversation, if you can't answer why you fit into that category, and why you are not just like everybody else, just jumping into the pool and didn't realize how deep it was before you jumped into it, or what the expectations are from someone who is looking, that thinks that category is going to solve their challenge or problem, just be careful about that, because that is one of the things that can really put you on the don't call me back again list, because
Yeah.
it puts into the question the integrity or of the organization, in terms of, are you really just looking to increase your transactions, or are you truly a fit in that category, trying to help the industry and those target customers solve that problem?
Yeah, the lipstick on the pig answer is
Yes.
what I use, what I call it, because if it lipstick on a pig and just hope nobody nobody figures out it's a pig. Yeah, and I think it's that's a really great cautionary tale, because there are, for the bigger vendors out there, there's lots of acquisitions that have happened over the years, of which, you acquire the thing. It's like, okay, we're playing to this category now. But there's still some scaffolding that typically has to be done after an acquisition to make sure that, it can play in that category. How does it fit your overall mantra of the business? And most importantly, is that product that you bought is actually serving your ICP. If you buy a product in which, functionally it makes sense, right? It makes sense.
Yeah.
And yes, it sounds like a good add-on solution. But let's say you're focused on enterprise, but then you actually double click in the product, you take it to your enterprise customers. And this is a true story, by the way. Then your enterprise customers immediately tell you, hey, by the way, like this doesn't have all the stuff we need. Like, this is probably fine for mid-market and your smaller customer, but this is not good for us. Then you also have a problem. So I think that there is, I would say that not only is it category, but also double click in that category, and what is the maturity of the target ideal customer profile that you're
Yes.
serving, and are you fit for that? Because you could be great. There HubSpot and Salesforce just had their big conferences. HubSpot doesn't. And funny enough, they were at the same time, Dreamforce and HubSpot's conference. But, I can see why HubSpot's not going after that same enterprise customer base. At least from the outward looking in, it doesn't look like that case. And so that's fine. But I think a lot of times they get kind of put in the same they are in the same category if you look at Gartner. But if you
Right.
actually double click, the features and functionality and the way that they extend wasn't made for that persona. So I think that to your point, I would also caution to say, are you in that category, comma, and then the specific sub market segment you're catering to, you want to cater to, how do you fit in that? Is that
Yeah.
fair?
That is very fair, and something that they absolutely should keep in mind, because something that fits, a Fortune 10 company doesn't fit that privately held $1 billion company, because they're two very
Yeah.
different types of customers. Although
Very,
they
very,
may be
very, very
in the
different.
same industry, but they're different based on their size.
Very, very different. All right. Well, I want to just wrap up and do something fun before we kind of do a summary. So I do this with all my guests, John, and I never tell them. So you have that surprise look on your face. So this is called rapid fire. So I'm going to ask a few questions and just a couple word answers, just the first thing that pops in your head. So it's kind of just to know a little bit more about John Sapp. Okie
All
doke.
right, go for it.
Okay. The most influential person in your life to date.
My mother, because she made me go to that vocational technical school, and that was the foundation upon which my career was built.
What is your greatest personal win or something you're proud of in your personal life?
Wow, greatest personal win. Ah, actually, I will say this. So, I actually, some people know this about me. I've coached youth and high school football for about 20 years, retired from it a couple of years ago. But my greatest personal win was actually, we took a team to Florida and competed in the football university national championship. It was a seventh grade team. We didn't win, but we made it to that national championship game when it wasn't really thought that we could get there. So
Great.
but it was all about giving something back, and that was my way. Sports has been a big part of my life, and that was my way of giving back to kids who have a passion for the sport. But it was an opportunity to coach and teach teamwork, and the things that come from what you can when you work together as a team, what you can accomplish.
Oh man, you are definitely the parent that would watch and like just be applaud. I'm that parent that's like, get in there, let's like the ref is giving warnings too, like you pulled my daughter's shirt. What's going on? Are you blind? I'm that person. So I'm now I feel like I don't we do kids sports because we want to compete in our family. So okay, well I'll have to humble
Well,
myself
but
here.
that's
So
why I
okay.
coach too, because I'm a very competitive person, and I have to manage that in the corporate environment, but in the coach's box, you get to really see the other side of
Yeah, you do. Okay. Well, remind me that if we need a sub for one of my kids' 4 soccer teams, I'll give you a call. And
it.
I will want to see another side of John. All right, John. If you had to be stuck anywhere, somewhere, but it's only one place in the world, but you had to be stuck there for 1 year, where would that be
Barcelona.
and why?
So I did a Mediterranean cruise, gosh, about 5 or 6 years ago, and it left from Barcelona, and there was just so much. One, I love everything about Barcelona. Plus, I can get to some of the other places that I really want to go to. Um, you know, I would probably, yeah. So that was just what it was just the experience I had there, that I really just kind of fell in love with Barcelona.
Yeah, I think they do siestas too. Do they? Can't remember.
I think they do.
Yeah, I think they do. I think they shut down in the middle of the day. Well,
Yeah.
I would go just for the nap. So that sounds good. All right. So just to wrap up, some of the nuggets that I noted from today's call is making sure that you can find before you commit to the customer design partner, make sure you know their why and that this aligns to great business outcomes for them in order to maximize your ROI, your value realization at the end. Making sure the persona of who is going to be, let's call them your champion or your executive sponsor, so to speak, is someone like John. That you're going to really come off this call with I just got to find myself some John Sapps in the world, but nevertheless, someone who is not afraid to take a plunge, not afraid of trying something new, and someone really at the end of the day who's going to be able to advocate internally for your product, because typically that's the same persona that will also go to market and advocate for you as well. And then most importantly, just have a lot of clarity in those early days, and leverage your customer design partners and helping you to understand what category do you truly fit in? What value do you really bring? Perhaps you think you have value in this area, but if you can have that opportunity to really have open ears and an open mind, your initial customers will probably tell you where you should be marketing. Not no offense, but not the boardroom and not your investment committee. So, with that being said, thank you, listeners, for joining us on yet another episode of the Go to Market Lab. I really hope today's discussion has provided you not only with good strategy, but actionable insights that will help you accelerate your business growth and help you maybe unpack some problems that are up front and center that you're facing your businesses today. So if you did enjoy today's episode, which how could you not? We've got infamous John Sapp on. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm guessing John is also very happy to field any questions. So you'll see on LinkedIn the post. If you have any feedback, if you want to share your own stories around this topic and what you found works and doesn't work, this whole podcast is much like John said about his personal motivation, both professionally and personally, is to give back. This is really about helping us as a cohesive team and go to market in the tech industry, share insights with each other. But definitely comment if what you found valuable, and if there's other specific industry experts, founders, and other strategies that you want to hear on future podcast episodes. So that being said, make sure to subscribe again on LinkedIn and this podcast, and that way you can be notified of future episodes. And together, what we all hope is that we can navigate the complexities of this ever-changing, very aggressive, growing technology market, helping you unlock your potential and reach your personal and your company growth goals faster. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, guys.